I'm Jimmy Holland, and welcome to another edition of A Preacher and His Work. We have so many great gospel preachers across the country and around the world, and this is our way of helping you get to know them just a little better. And once again, we're coming to you from Polishing the Pulpit here in Sevierville, Tennessee, and this is a special edition of A Preacher and His Work. We're going to spend this episode talking with Brother Jim Dearman again, and we're going to dive a little deeper into some of his answers that he gave us in our first interview. And Brother Dearman, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Jimmy.
You made mention when we did the last interview that you had gone through a period of time where you had drifted away, and that it was the conversion of your wife that brought you back.
That's right.
And I was hoping that you and I could talk about that in a little more detail.
Sure, be glad to. As I've mentioned before, it's not something you're proud of.
Right.
A period of unfaithfulness, and certainly you wish there had been that steady progression as a young person to more spiritual maturity with no interruptions from the world. But sometimes it happens, and there's no excuse for it. You're not saying. I never take the position that a young person should be expected to sow his wild oats, because that is anti-biblical.
Right.
But it does happen at times because of worldly influences, obviously. I was blessed to, as a very young child, in my Christian home, to be influenced by godly parents, to the extent that when I was a very young person, we had a preacher in Smithfield, Tennessee, which is my hometown, Willie Lemons, and he had red hair, and I had red hair as a little boy. I don't have much hair left, period, now, but as a little boy I was redheaded, and they would ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I would say, well, I want to be a redheaded preacher like Brother Lemons. So I had that early inclination and desire, but and then we moved away and we spent some time in Florida and ultimately then in Nashville. And I guess the turning point from the standpoint of the drifting or the influence of the world came when we returned to my hometown about the time I was an 8th grader, I guess. And I think some of my peers there, though I had been with them when I was much younger and had been away and into the big city of Nashville, and I think some of the assumption based on how young people can be was that, oh, here's a city slicker coming back now, and I guess I had kind of an initiation period back into the group, so to speak.
Yes, sir.
And rather than standing apart from the group and some of the influences, I succumbed to peer pressure to be, accepted in ways that I should not have been concerned about. And so I would attribute it to a great extent to an inclination, because I've never been a controversial person.
Right.
And I've always enjoyed being, in a good situation where everybody likes everybody else.
That's right.
I think we're all that way, hopefully.
Yes, sir.
But that inclination can result in temptation, and temptation to which you succumb sometimes. And so that was when that really occurred. I think that was a turning point. And that period really extended into my college days. And then I was blessed, didn't know how blessed I was at the time, fully, to meet my wife at the University of Tennessee, where we were both students. And she was not a Christian at the time. And so then there was that continual period, even after our marriage, where, we were not faithful. She had not obeyed the gospel. We moved to Birmingham from Nashville. I was transferred from Knoxville to Nashville as news director of a radio station there. I was in broadcasting, and that was my major in school of journalism communications. And then from Nashville, a station was purchased in Birmingham, and so I was transferred there as news director. And there we met a preacher And I think I mentioned him in the earlier interview,
Right.
Rex Morer, who was a faithful, dedicated gospel preacher and very persistent as a personal worker. And I think probably through the electric company or utilities board or whatever, they found us and called on us. And he continued to be very patient, very persistent, and ultimately, my wife studied more on her own than I realized she was studying even. And I came home from the radio station one day to find a baptismal certificate on the dresser in the bedroom. And it was, quite a shock. But she explained to me that she had just been reading Scripture and ultimately culminating in Romans 6, 3, and 4 on baptism, and just the simplicity and straightforwardness of that passage and the realization that she had not been baptized into Christ. Right. And of course she knew that my background was in the church, and ironically, even during a period of unfaithfulness, because of the background and the teaching, I would argue for the church in many ways, but I was not living it. So I was inconsistent, to say the least, but she had that exposure.
Right.
And then that culminated in her studying and calling Rex and saying, I need to meet you at the building. I need to be baptized into Christ. And so that was what she did. And when I saw the baptismal certificate, then of course that was the wake-up call
Right.
for me. And things began to move in a much better direction, obviously, and then I was restored. And the rest is history, as they say. Ultimately then, because of the influences of the Shades Mountain congregation, where Rex was preaching, Brother Franklin Camp was associated
Right.
with that church for many years, and one of the elders, Brother Jim Foster, knew Roy Hearn very well, who was the director of the Memphis School of Preaching. And it was interesting, one night we were having dinner with Jim and his wife Jane, and the conversation just evolved into well, let me get on the phone and call Roy Hearn and we can see about getting you enrolled right now. And my wife reflects on that now and says, ooh, I was a new Christian, and here I am, suddenly I'm going to be a preacher's wife. She said it was somewhat overwhelming, but she handled it beautifully and has always been such a tremendous asset. But yes, I credit her with that influence and that good heart she had, and I don't hesitate to tell her that on a very regular basis, that I owe her so much. But so that, and I was privileged to do a piece for World Video Bible School, following up on the Searching for Truth that John Moore did so beautifully. That has converted a great
Absolutely.
many people. And they wanted to do one called Returning to Truth, and I was privileged to be a part of that. Chuck Horner wrote the script based on the Ivan Stewart material, and basically it was, and many have used the DVD that's been produced, but just basically I'm going to someone's door and the door opens as if you don't see the person, you see me. I come in and sit down with the individual, supposedly, or individuals, and talk to them about their wayward condition.
Right.
And it's a two-part study there, but they allowed me to add what I wanted to, and to edit and make it more comfortable for myself. But I insisted on including a statement in that presentation that I know where you are, talking to that wayward individual.
Right.
I know where you are because I have been there. And I wrote a tract years ago based on a lesson I was asked to present at the Knight Arnold Church as a young preacher, called the Evil Results of Sowing Wild Oats. And the tract was ultimately entitled A Bitter Harvest. And I just simply went through the consequences
Right.
of that period of sowing wild oats. And there are consequences.
Absolutely.
But if you're blessed to be able to get through that and you don't die during that period of unfaithfulness, which is one of obviously the most dire consequences that can occur, along with the memory of those times, the wasted years, etc. Those are some of the things I brought out. But you're not proud of that, but you try to use that in any way you can to let people know at least this, and that is, no matter where you are, how far you have gone, you can come back. The Lord will forgive any sin of which you're willing to repent.
Absolutely.
And when you do come back, you cannot dwell on the past and allow that to hinder your present effort. you must move forward and accept the forgiveness that
Right.
God has given. You know, the Apostle Paul was obviously the classic example of
Absolutely.
that. He called himself the chief of sinners. If the Apostle Paul, who consented to the death of Christians, could accept God's forgiveness, and he did, and accomplish what he did, then certainly no one is beyond the scope of that wonderful grace that is available when we will appropriate it and meet God's terms of conditions of pardon.
And he never minimized what he did in the past.
Absolutely not. You do not look back and say, well, you know, young people, that's expected to sow your
Right.
wild oats, as I mentioned earlier. No, you don't. You don't. You certainly regret,
Absolutely.
as Paul regretted what he had done, but he didn't allow it to
Rob him.
to hinder, you know, his present efforts. So, no, you never advise someone to go through a period of unfaithfulness so that you can learn from that and
Right.
be even more appreciative of your salvation. No, that's a false premise, obviously.
You know, it seems that there's a misconception when it comes to ministers, really, that it's been a smooth transition.
Mm-hmm,
You know, for you've became a Christian and it's just been smooth sailing. You become a preacher, and there's really no hardship. There's no stumbling. There's no. I guess you're a super Christian, so to speak, and that's just not the case.
No. The Apostle Paul, again, is a classic example of that. He said, I buffet my body daily, bring it under subjection, lest haply after I've preached to others, I myself might be a castaway.
That's right.
He understood that he had the same temptations. He was a human being. He was not yes, he was an inspired man, but that did not benefit him from the standpoint of living the Christian
That's
life
right.
any more than we're benefited. He had the Word in earthen vessels at that time, obviously. We have it in final written form, but we have to apply it just as he had to.
Right. You know, and I look at Paul, and as I said, he never minimized what he did in the past. He regretted what he did in the past, but he also used it as motivation to show people what God had done for him.
That's right.
This is where I was. This is where I am, not because of how great I am, but because of how great God is.
Oh yes, and in 1 Corinthians 15, you know, he pointed out, by the grace of God I am what I am, and that grace which was bestowed on me was not in vain, for I labored more abundantly than the others. You
That's
know,
right.
But he said, but not me, but the grace of God that was with
That's
me.
right.
He, if any man outside of Christ, obviously, who walked the earth, understood the grace of God any better than Paul, I'd like to know who it was. I think he did, and we need to learn from that as well.
Absolutely. Well, when you look at, for example, Romans 8:28, all things work together for good to those that love the Lord, and I agree wholeheartedly. I think it's foolish to encourage someone to give in to sin.
Oh, absolutely. So that they can know the effects of it. No.
But as you said, there are consequences.
Sure.
You know, Galatians 6, 7, and 8 teaches
That's right.
there's going to be consequences for every decision and action that we make.
Sure.
But God, if we allow Him to, can use those shortcomings to reach others and to teach others. And have you found that to be a benefit in your ministry?
Yes, I think so, because I think it helps whether you verbalize that to someone with whom you are having an opportunity to study, but you know that where you were,
Right.
and I think it helps you to approach those in a way that is more understanding, if you will, and keeps you from giving in to what might be a condescending attitude. It gets back to Galatians 6, looking to yourself lest you also be tempted, in restoring such a one as Paul admonished. It gives you a perspective, not a perspective you wish you didn't have.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
I do.
But once you do have it, then use it to the fullest advantage to help yourself to understand, whether you verbalize it to someone or not. I know where you are, but I also know where you can be because I was there.
Absolutely.
And many times verbalizing it is helpful to do.
Yes,
with
sir,
that
it is.
individual.
Well, Brother Dearman, I really appreciate your time today.
Oh, appreciate the opportunity, Jimmy. Thank you so much.
And as I said before, appreciate everything that you're doing.
Thank you.
Appreciate Good News Today.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate that.
And look forward to spending more time with you in the future.
Same here, brother. Thank you.
I appreciate you being with us, and I look forward to being with you next time on A Preacher and His Work.
To God be the glory, great things The preceding program was a production of the Fort Payne Church of Christ TV studio located in Fort Payne, Alabama.